He was a single father, drowning in grief and debt, who'd stopped believing in second chances long ago. She emerged from the midnight waters like a ghost, her evening gown shimmering with seawater, her trembling hands protecting the unborn child within. Neither could have imagined that a desperate rescue beneath a luxury marina's moonlight would become the saving grace that transformed their broken lives into something beautiful. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The harbor lights of Newport Beach glittered across the water like fallen stars, their reflections dancing on gentle waves. The marina hummed with the quiet luxury of wealth, sleek yachts bobbing in their slips, champagne glasses clinking on distant decks, the occasional burst of laughter carrying across the water. This particular stretch of California coastline had always been a playground for the wealthy, a place where fortunes were flaunted on floating mansions and business deals were sealed over sunset cruises. The world seemed suspended between opulence and ordinary life, oblivious to those caught in between. Marcus Calloway stood on the weathered dock outside his modest houseboat, scrubbing the day's grime from his hands. His shoulders ached from 12 hours beneath engines at the marina's repair shop, work that barely covered rent and his daughter's needs. The salt air mingled with the scent of motor oil that never quite left his skin these days. No matter how hard he scrubbed, at 34, the lines around his eyes had deepened, not from laughter but from worry, from the weight of being everything to someone who depended on him completely. Beside him, 8-year-old Zoe sat cross-legged on a faded deck cushion, intently arranging a collection of seashells by size and pattern. Her dark curls fell across her face as she worked, hiding the small scar above her left eyebrow, a permanent reminder of the night that had changed everything. She hadn't spoken a word in nearly 2 years, not since the night her mother's. And car had plunged off the coastal highway. The specialist called it selective mutism, triggered by trauma. Marcus called it the heaviest silence he'd ever carried. This was their nightly ritual, him cleaning up after work, while Zoe organized her treasures nearby. The gentle lap of water against the hull, the distant hum of boats returning to their slips. Marcus had come to appreciate these moments of quiet predictability in a life that had become anything but certain. "Almost done there, seahorse?" he asked softly, using the nickname that had stuck since she was a toddler fascinated by the aquarium. Zoe didn't answer verbally, but her small smile and quick nod were enough. They communicated in their own language now, gestures, expressions, notes left on the refrigerator. He'd learned to read her silence like others read words. Life hadn't always been this way. Before the accident, Marcus had been a successful marine engineer, designing luxury vessels for the very people whose boats he now repaired. He and Laura had lived in a hillside home with ocean views, planning weekend getaways and Zoe's future college fund. Then came the rainy night, the slick roads, the call that shattered everything. In the aftermath, grief made him careless. Projects were neglected, deadlines missed. When the firm finally let him go, the downward spiral accelerated. Savings depleted for therapy Zoe desperately needed, the house sold to pay medical bills, and finally, the move to this houseboat, the last affordable option that would keep. Them near the water Laura had loved so much. The houseboat wasn't much, 2 tiny bedrooms, a galley kitchen, and a small living area, but they'd made it home. Marine-themed curtains Zoe had picked out, walls covered with her drawings. A collection of salvaged boat parts Marcus had repurposed into lamps and shelves. It was theirs, a floating refuge in a world that had proven itself unreliable. As darkness settled over the marina, the temperature dropped. Marcus reached for Zoe's jacket, draped over a deck chair. "Getting chilly, seahorse. Time to head in." He helped her gather her shells into a small canvas bag, noticing how carefully she handled each one. as if they were precious gems instead of discarded homes of long-gone creatures. From further down the marina, the thrum of music grew louder. Another extravagant party on one of the mega yachts that dwarfed their humble vessel. The Endless Summer, a 120-foot beauty owned by tech mogul Philip Westbrook, was especially bright tonight, strung with additional lights for what looked to be a particularly lavish gathering. Marcus had worked on its engines just last week, a rush job that paid well, but required him to bite his tongue when Westbrook complained about the inconvenience while checking his watch that cost more than Marcus made in a year. "Different worlds," Marcus murmured, guiding Zoe toward their cabin door. He tried not to be bitter about the contrast between their lives and those of the marina's wealthy patrons. Resentment wouldn't put food on their table or help Zoe heal. Besides, those repair jobs paid their bills, kept them afloat, both literally and figuratively. Inside, their evening routine continued. Simple dinner, Zoe's homework, a game of checkers where she inevitably beat him. By 9, she was tucked into bed, her favorite threadbare stuffed dolphin clutched to her chest, her eyes already heavy with sleep. Marcus sat beside her bed, as he did every night, and read from Island of the Blue Dolphins, the story of a young girl's resilience and survival that had become Zoe's favorite. "We'll finish the chapter tomorrow," he promised, kissing her forehead. She squeezed his hand twice, their code for "I love you," and he returned the gesture. "Love you more, seahorse. Sleep tight." Later, Marcus sat on the small deck, nursing a cup of coffee gone cold. The party on the Westbrook yacht was still going strong, the music shifting to something with a heavier beat. He should turn in. 5 a.m. would come too soon, bringing another day of crawling through engine compartments and fixing what the wealthy had broken. But sleep rarely comes easily these days, his mind too full of worries about upcoming bills, Zoe's therapy costs, and the leak in the roof he hadn't found time to properly fix. The night air carried a hint of autumn chill, unusually cool for southern California. The moon hung low and full, casting long silver reflections across the water. Marcus watched its light shimmer on the surface, remembering how Laura used to say that moonlight on water was magic, old light traveling millions of miles just to dance on waves before bouncing into their eyes. He was so lost in memory that, at first, he didn't hear it. A splash too deliberate to be a fish, too desperate to be a diver. Then came a sound that cut through the night and froze his blood. A woman's gasping cry for help. Marcus sprang to his feet, coffee mug clattering to the deck. His eyes scanned the dark water, searching for the source of the cry. Another splash, weaker this time, drew his attention toward the shadowy area between the docks, away from the lights and activity of the Westbrook yacht. "Hello?" he called out, voice cutting through the night air. "Where are you?" A faint response, barely audible over the ambient noise of the marina and the distant music. "Help, please." Without hesitation, Marcus kicked off his shoes and dove into the water. The cold hit him like a physical blow, shocking his system. The salt stung his eyes as he surfaced, orienting himself toward where he'd heard the voice. The water was darker than he expected, the marina lights creating deceptive shadows on the surface. "Keep calling out," he shouted, swimming with powerful strokes. His years spent in the water made him a strong swimmer, but the darkness complicated things. Then he saw her, a pale figure struggling to stay afloat about 20 yards away, her arms moving erratically, her strength clearly failing. As he drew closer, details emerged, a woman in what appeared to be an evening gown, her dark hair plastered to her face and neck, makeup streaking down her cheeks, gasping for breath between desperate attempts to keep her head above water. But what stopped his heart was the unmistakable swell of her abdomen. She was pregnant, possibly far along. "I've got you," Marcus called, reaching her side. "I'm here, you're going to be okay." She turned toward his voice, revealing a face marked by terror and exhaustion. Her eyes, wide and panicked, locked onto his. She tried to speak, but could only cough, water spilling from her mouth. "Don't try to talk," he instructed, moving into a rescue position. "I'm going to help you back to my boat. Just try to relax and breathe." She nodded weakly, allowing him to support her from behind. He could feel her trembling violently, whether from cold or shock. He couldn't tell. What struck him most was how she kept one arm curved protectively over her pregnant belly, even in her distress. The swimback felt eternal. Marcus was strong, but supporting both of them taxed even his conditioning. The woman's dress had become a sodden weight, dragging them down. Twice she slipped into coughing fits that halted their progress. By the time they reached his houseboat, his muscles burned with exertion. "Just a little further," he encouraged, guiding her toward the small ladder attached to his dock. "Can you climb?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She nodded again, though her movements were becoming increasingly uncoordinated, a worrying sign of hypothermia setting in. Marcus climbed up first, then reached down to help her. As she emerged from the water, the full picture became clearer. She wore a once elegant emerald evening gown, now ruined by seawater. Diamond earrings caught the moonlight. Her left wrist bore an expensive watch, still ticking despite its soaking. This woman belonged to the world of the mega yachts, not struggling in the harbor at night. Once on deck, her legs gave out. Marcus caught her before she hit the wooden planks, lifting her into his arms. "I've got you," he repeated, carrying her toward the houseboat's door. She felt surprisingly light despite her pregnancy, as though the water had washed away more than just her strength. Inside, a small figure stood frozen in the narrow hallway. Zoe, awakened by the commotion, eyes wide at the sight of her father, carrying a dripping, half-conscious stranger. "It's okay, Seahorse," Marcus said calmly, though his heart was racing. "This lady needs our help. Can you get the big towels from the bathroom?" Zoe hesitated only a moment before darting away on her mission. Marcus carried the woman to the small sofa, gently setting her down. Up close, in the light, he could see bruising beginning to form on her upper arms, distinct finger marks, as though someone had gripped her hard enough to leave evidence. "You're safe now," he said, meeting her frightened gaze. "I'm Marcus. That was my daughter Zoe. What's your name?" Her lips trembled as she tried to form words. "Elena," she finally managed. "Elena Chambers." Zoe returned with an armful of towels, her small face a study in worried concentration. Marcus took them with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Seahorse. Can you bring the red emergency blanket too? The one in the hall closet?" While Zoe hurried off again, Marcus wrapped one of the towels around Elena's shoulders. "Elena, I need to know, are you hurt? Do we need to call an ambulance? The baby?" Her hand immediately went to her abdomen. "The baby's moving," she whispered. I think we're okay, but please." Her eyes darted to the door, then back to Marcus. "Please don't call anyone, not yet." The fear in her voice raised alarm bells. Marcus had seen that look before, not just fear of a situation, but fear of a specific person. Combined with those bruises forming on her arms, a troubling picture was emerging. "What happened out there, Elena? Did you fall from a boat?" She shook her head slightly, droplets of water falling from her hair. "He pushed me," she said, her voice so quiet Marcus almost missed it. "Philip pushed me over the rail when I told him I was leaving him." Marcus felt his blood run cold. Philip Westbrook, the tech mogul whose yacht was lit up like a floating palace just down the dock, one of the most powerful men in California. "Your husband pushed you off the yacht? Deliberately?" The words felt surreal leaving his mouth. Elena nodded, tears mixing with the seawater on her face. We were arguing on the aft deck, away from the guests. He'd been drinking. I told him I had evidence of his affairs, his financial manipulation, that I was taking our baby and leaving. Her hand tightened on the towel. He said if I tried to leave, I'd leave with nothing. Then he grabbed me and pushed me over. I heard him tell someone I'd slipped after having too much to drink. Zoe returned with the emergency blanket, her eyes fixed on Elena with a mixture of concern and curiosity. She handed the silver thermal blanket to her father, then surprised both adults by gently placing a small seashell, a perfect spiral, in Elena's palm. A gift offered with the solemn significance only a child could convey. Elena's fingers closed around the shell, tears flowing freely now. "Thank you," she whispered to Zoe. Marcus wrapped the thermal blanket around Elena, his mind racing. Harboring a woman whose billionaire husband had just attempted to murder her put them in a dangerous position. But looking at her, trembling, pregnant, clutching his daughter's shell like a lifeline, he knew there was no choice to make. "You need dry clothes and something warm to drink," he said decisively. "Then we'll figure out what to do." While Elena changed into spare clothes Marcus provided, sweatpants with a drawstring to accommodate her belly and an oversized sweatshirt. He heated water for tea, mind churning through options. The responsible thing would be to call the police, but Westbrook's influence extended everywhere in Newport Beach. Would they believe Elena's word against his? Would she and her unborn child be safe in the system while accusations flew? Zoe remained nearby, perched on a kitchen stool, watching the woman with unwavering attention. She hadn't shown this much interest in any stranger since the accident. When Eleanor emerged from the small bathroom, she looked marginally better, still pale and shaken, but no longer on the edge of collapse. The sweatshirt draped over her pregnant belly, which appeared to be around 7 months along. She tied her wet hair back, revealing a face that, despite its current distress, carried a natural elegance that spoke of her privileged background. "The clothes help," she said softly, accepting the mug of tea Marcus offered. "Thank you, both of you." She included Zoe in her gratitude, offering a small smile that the girl didn't return, though she didn't look away either. Marcus gestured toward the small dining table. "Let's sit. You should try to warm up completely before we decide next steps." As they settled, the sound of raised voices and activity drifted through the windows, shouting, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, the rumble of a boat engine starting up. "They're looking for me," Elena whispered, tensing visibly. "He'll tell everyone I accidentally fell overboard after drinking too much. That they searched but couldn't find me in the dark water." Her hands cradled her belly protectively. "By morning, I'll be the tragic society wife who drowned." Marcus moved to the window, carefully peering through the blinds. Sure enough, a search was underway. Crew members from the Westbrook Yacht scanning the water with lights, a smaller boat making methodical passes through the marina. From this distance, it looked like an appropriate concern for a missing guest. Only he and Elena knew the darker truth beneath the performance. "They won't look here," he said, turning back to her. "There's no reason they would, but we need to think about what happens after tonight." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Elena, a man who would do what your husband did. He won't stop looking, especially once he realizes you survived." She met his gaze, something steely emerging through her fear. "I know," she said quietly. "That's why I need to disappear, completely, until the baby comes and I can prove what he's done." She hesitated. "I have evidence. Financial records, threatening messages, photos of previous injuries. It's all on a secure cloud account, but I need time and safety to access it, organize it. And you need a doctor." Marcus added. Soon, to check on the baby after the trauma you've been through. A small sound made them both turn. Zoe had slid off her stool and now stood beside Elena's chair. With deliberate care, she placed a folded piece of paper on the table. Elena looked to Marcus, questioningly. She wants you to read it, he explained, softly. Elena unfolded the note written in a child's careful handwriting. You can stay in my room. I'll sleep with Dad. The simple offer, the first direct communication Zoe had initiated with a stranger in nearly 2 years, left both adults momentarily speechless. Elena's eyes filled with fresh tears as she looked at the solemn-faced girl. That's very kind of you, Zoe, she said gently. Are you sure? Zoe nodded once, decisively, then pointed to her own chest, then to Elena's pregnant belly, and then held up 2 fingers. Marcus translated the gesture with wonder in his voice. She's saying you count as 2 people, so you need more space. He looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and amazement. Something about this situation, about Elena, had broken through a barrier Zoe had maintained for so long. As the searchlights continued to sweep across the harbor outside, the 3 unlikely companions sat in the warm kitchen of the houseboat, united by crisis and compassion. None of them could have predicted the morning would find them here, thrown together by an act of terrible cruelty and an act of simple humanity. For now, they were momentarily safe in the eye of the storm. But dawn would bring new challenges. Decisions that would alter the course of all their lives. And somewhere out on that gleaming yacht, a man with wealth and power was orchestrating a lie to cover up his attempted murder, unaware that his victim had found shelter with the most unlikely of allies. Dawn arrived with a pale golden light that filtered through the houseboat's small windows, painting stripes across the worn floorboards. Elena woke disoriented, momentarily panicked until memory returned in a rush. The argument, the horrifying moment of weightlessness as she fell, the cold shock of water, and then rescue. She sat up slowly in Zoe's narrow bed, wincing as her body protested. The room around her was a child's sanctuary. Walls adorned with marine life posters, a bookshelf filled with stories of oceans and adventure, a collection of shells arranged meticulously on a small desk. A handmade dream catcher hung above. The bed, its center woven in the shape of a seahorse. Despite the circumstances, Elena felt a strange peace in this small, carefully curated space. The baby shifted within her, a reassuring movement that brought tears of relief. She placed both hands on her belly, whispering, "We made it, little one. We're safe." A soft knock interrupted her moment of gratitude. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of concern and awkwardness. He'd clearly been up for hours. His hair was damp from a shower, and he wore clean work clothes, though the dark circles under his eyes spoke of little sleep. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly. "Sore," Elena admitted, "but alive. Thanks." "To you," he nodded, seeming uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I made coffee, and there's toast if you're hungry. Nothing fancy, I'm afraid." "Toast sounds perfect." She started to rise, then hesitated, suddenly aware of her vulnerability. No phone, no money, wearing borrowed clothes in a stranger's home. "Marcus, I know you've already done so much, but I need to ask for more help, just until I can figure things out." His expression softened. "I called in sick to work today. Thought we should talk through next steps." He paused. "Zoe's at school. She was worried about leaving you, but I convinced her you'd still be here when she gets back." The mention of the silent child brought a fresh wave of emotion. "She gave up her bed for me. A complete stranger." "That's who she is," Marcus said, simply, "or who she was. Before." He didn't finish the thought. "Anyway, let's talk over breakfast." In the small kitchen, Elena saw evidence of Marcus's early morning activity. A newspaper spread open to local news, a laptop showing Marina, Surveillance footage, a notepad filled with hastily scrawled notes. He'd been gathering information, assessing the situation while she slept. As he poured coffee and prepared toast, Elena noticed the tight quarters with new awareness. The houseboat, while lovingly maintained, showed signs of financial strain. Mismatched dishes, carefully mended curtains, furniture that had seen better days. This man who had saved her life was clearly fighting his own battles. There was a formal missing persons report filed this morning, Marcus said, sliding a mug of decaf coffee toward her. Philip Westbrook reported his wife fell overboard during a party on their yacht. Says he didn't realize you were missing until they docked and he couldn't find you. His jaw tightened. Claims you'd been drinking champagne all night despite your pregnancy. Elena's hands curled around the warm mug, setting up his narrative. If my body washed ashore, alcohol would explain the accident and make me look like an unfit mother. The calculated cruelty of it made her stomach turn. What else? Coast Guard conducted a formal search at first light. Police interviewed guests from the party. The newspapers running the story, complete with a quote from your devastated husband offering a reward for information. Marcus pushed the newspaper toward her. The front page featured a photo of Philip at a press conference, his handsome face arranged in an expression of appropriate distress. Beside it was a recent photo of Elena at a charity gala, smiling in diamonds and silk. Pregnant wife of tech billionaire missing, presumed drowned, the headline declared. He looks heartbroken, Eleanor said bitterly. He's always been an excellent actor. The marina's buzzing with the news. Everyone's talking about the tragedy. Marcus hesitated. No one connects it to the commotion at my dock last night. Your rescue went unnoticed. Elena stared at her own image in the paper, a woman who technically no longer existed. What happens now? Marcus sat across from her, his expression grave. That depends on what you want to do. We could go to the police with your story. No, Elena interrupted firmly. Philip has half the police department in his pocket. The other half wouldn't risk crossing him. Until I access my evidence and find the right legal help, going public would be suicide. Then option 2 is helping you disappear for real, at least temporarily. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. I have a contact, former client from my engineering days, runs a small property management company up the coast, owes me a favor. He might be able to set you up somewhere quiet, no questions asked. Hope flickered in Elena's chest. How far up the coast? Bodega Bay, small fishing town, about 8 hours north. Remote enough to hide, but with a medical clinic that could monitor your pregnancy. He hesitated. The problem is getting you there. Your face is all over the news now. Airports, train stations, bus terminals, all risky. Elena nodded slowly, mind racing. I need to change my appearance, and we'd need to drive back roads if possible. She met his eyes. But Marcus, I can't ask you to do that. You've already risked enough harboring me here. You have Zoe to think about. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Marcus stared into his coffee cup, clearly wrestling with a decision. When he looked up, his expression had shifted. When Zoe's mother died, he said quietly, there were people who stepped up for us. Strangers who showed kindness when we needed it most. I can't explain why, but he gestured vaguely at the small living space. This life we have, it's hanging by a thread most days, but it's ours because people helped when they didn't have. 2, he took a deep breath. Weekend starts tomorrow. I could take Zoe on a camping trip up the coast. No one would question it. We do it sometimes when I can afford the gas. Could get you to Bodega Bay by Sunday. The offer hung in the air, its generosity almost overwhelming. Why would you do this for me? Elena whispered. You don't even know me. Marcus's expression turned distant, as if seeing something beyond. The small kitchen. When I pulled you from that water, your first instinct was to protect your baby. Not yourself. Your child. his voice roughened. "I've seen that kind of love before. It matters." Elena felt tears threaten again. In her world of calculated social alliances and transactional relationships, this straightforward kindness seemed almost foreign. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing the words were insufficient. The moment was interrupted by a sharp rap at the door. Both of them froze. "Harbor Patrol," called a male voice. "Routine check as part of the search effort." Marcus motioned for Elena to stay put, then crossed to the door, opening it just enough to show his face. "Morning, officer. What's going on?" Through the crack in the doorway, Elena could see a uniformed Harbor Patrol officer holding a tablet, conducting welfare checks on all live aboards. Woman went missing from a yacht last night. Just making sure everyone is accounted for and seeing if anyone notices anything unusual. "Yeah, I heard about that," Marcus said casually. "Saw the search boats earlier. Haven't noticed anything out of the ordinary, though. Just me and my daughter here." The officer peered past him. "Mind if I come in? Just protocol." Marcus shifted his stance subtly, blocking the view inside. "Place is a mess, honestly. Getting ready for a weekend camping trip with my kid. But if you insist..." Before the officer could respond, shouting erupted further down the dock. Someone had spotted something in the water. The distraction gave Marcus the opening he needed. "Sounds like you're needed over there," he suggested. "I can come by the office later if you have more questions." The officer hesitated, then nodded. "Check in before the end of day," he said before hurrying toward the commotion. Marcus shut the door, exhaling heavily. That was close. Elena had pressed herself against the kitchen wall, heart pounding. "What did they find in the water?" "Probably just debris," Marcus said, though his expression remained tense. "But it confirms they're searching this area thoroughly. We need to move quickly." He glanced at the clock. "Zoe's school gets out at 3. We'll leave tonight after dark." The rest of the day passed in careful preparation. Elena remained hidden inside, while Marcus made discreet arrangements, calling his contact in Bodega Bay, mapping a route that avoided major highways, packing essentials for what would appear to be a normal weekend camping trip with his daughter. In the early afternoon, he returned from a supply run with hair dye, scissors, and plain clothes that would help Elena blend in as a typical mom on a family trip. The bronze-colored hair dye was a dramatic departure from her natural blonde, but would help disguise her from the photos circulating in the news. While Marcus was out collecting Zoe from school, Eleanor stood in the small bathroom, hands shaking slightly as she applied the dye. She stared at her reflection as the rich color took hold, transforming her into someone unrecognizable from the polished society wife who had boarded the yacht just 24 hours earlier. As she rinsed away the excess dye, watching it swirl down the drain, something shifted within her. Each change, the color darkening her hair, the oversized sweatshirt replacing designer clothes, the absence of makeup and jewelry, felt like shedding a skin she'd worn too long. The woman emerging was closer to the person she'd been before Philip, before his wealth and control had gradually reshaped her. Elena cut several inches off her newly colored hair, creating a simple style that framed her face differently. When Zoe and Marcus returned, the little girl stopped in the doorway, studying Elena's transformation with solemn attention. Then, to everyone's surprise, she gave a small nod of approval before disappearing into her room to pack her own bag. For their journey, she likes the new look, Marcus translated, a hint of amusement breaking through his tension, and she's excited about the trip. "I think we're having an adventure, aren't we?" Elena asked softly, his expression sobered. "A dangerous one. Philip Westbrook isn't a man who loses gracefully. When they don't find your body, he'll start looking for you among the living." Elena's hand went instinctively to her belly. "By then, we'll be long gone." She paused. "Marcus, I want you to know, once we reach Bodega Bay, Once this baby is born safely, I'll make sure you and Zoe are compensated for everything you've risked. I have resources he doesn't know about, ways to access funds he can't trace." Marcus shook his head. "That's not why we're helping you." "I know," she said gently. "That's exactly why I want to help you in return." As dusk fell over the marina, they made final preparations. Marcus's old SUV was packed with camping gear, providing both cover for their true purpose and a place for Elena to hide if necessary during stops. They would leave after midnight, when the marina was quietest and the patrol officers changed shifts. Elena sat with Zoe at the small table, watching as the girl carefully wrapped her treasured shells in tissue paper to bring along. In the soft lamplight, with her bronze hair and borrowed clothes, Eleanor no longer resembled the woman whose face was splashed across the news. She had become someone new, someone fighting not for social status or wealth, but simply for her child's right to exist safely in the world. Outside, the lights of Newport Beach glittered, oblivious to the small drama unfolding on a weathered houseboat. Somewhere among those lights, Philip Westbrook was likely sitting in his mansion, believing he had successfully eliminated his problem. He didn't yet know that the woman he had tried to drown had been reborn, like a phoenix from water rather than fire, and was preparing to disappear into the night with unlikely allies. The waiting hours stretched taut with anticipation, each passing minute bringing them closer to escape or discovery. Midnight came and went in a whisper of tension. The marina had finally quieted, with only the occasional creak of wood and lap of water breaking the silence. Elena sat motionless on the small sofa, a baseball cap pulled low over her newly darkened hair, her borrowed clothes making her look like any other weekend traveler. Beside her, Zoe had dozed off, her small head resting against Elena's arm in a gesture of trust that felt both precious and weighty. Marcus moved efficiently around the houseboat, making final preparations with the quiet precision of someone accustomed to handling crises alone. He checked the windows periodically, scanning for any unusual movement among the docks. "Harbor Patrol made their last round 20 minutes ago," he reported in a low voice. "Next shift doesn't start for another hour. It's time." Elena nodded, gently stirring Zoe. The child woke instantly, fully alert in that uncanny way some children have. She grabbed her small backpack without being told, obviously familiar with their escape protocol. Elena wondered with a pang how many times they had needed to leave places quickly, how much instability this silent child had already endured. "Remember," Marcus said as he shouldered his own bag, "if we're stopped, you're Rebecca Sullivan, my sister-in-law from Seattle, visiting with us for a camping weekend. Zoe and I have used that cover before." He handed Elena a worn wallet containing a Washington State Library card and grocery store loyalty cards in the name Rebecca Sullivan, simple props to support the story if needed. The planning revealed a man familiar with living carefully, with maintaining escape routes. Elena wanted to ask what had necessitated such preparations, but this wasn't the time for deeper questions. They left the houseboat in stages. First Marcus, checking that the coast was clear, then Zoe, moving silently to the SUV parked in the darkest corner of the marina lot, and finally Elena, head down, walking with the slightly altered gait of someone trying to disguise a distinctive pregnancy. The vehicle was old but well maintained, with camping gear stacked visibly in the back windows. A tent, sleeping bags, a cooler. The perfect camouflage for their true purpose. Elena settled into the passenger seat, pulling a blanket over her lap. Zoe climbed into the back, immediately reaching for her headphones. Another part of their routine, Elena realized. Marcus started the engine, keeping the lights off until they had rolled silently out of the marina parking lot. Only when they reached the access road did he switch them on, becoming just another vehicle in the night. "We'll take back roads until we're well clear of Newport," he explained quietly. Adds time, but reduces the chance of cameras catching the plate. Highway patrol tends to watch the direct routes north. Elena nodded, struck by how competently he handled their escape. You've done this before, she observed. Not just camping. Trips. His hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the steering wheel. After Laura died, there were some complications with Zoe's care. Questions about my fitness as a guardian while I was... He hesitated, struggling. We needed space to heal without interference. He glanced in the rearview mirror at his daughter, who appeared absorbed in her music. Sometimes the system that's supposed to help can do more harm than good. The simple explanation contained volumes: grief, fear, a father's desperate protection of his traumatized child. Elena understood with sudden clarity that Marcus Calloway lived constantly on the edge of losing everything that mattered to him, just as she now did. As they wound through the sleeping coastal communities, Eleanor felt the tension in her body begin to ease. Each mile increased the distance between her and Philip, between her baby and danger. The rhythmic motion of the vehicle had a calming effect, and she found herself drifting, not quite sleeping but suspended in a state of exhausted relief. She was jolted to full awareness when Marcus suddenly pulled into a 24-hour gas station nearly 2 hours north of Newport. The stark fluorescent lights made her shrink into her seat. "Tank's nearly empty," he explained apologetically. "I'll be quick. Stay low." Elena pulled the blanket higher and adjusted her cap while Marcus pumped gas. Through half-closed eyes, she watched him. Efficient movements, casual stance, nothing to draw attention. He went inside to pay in cash, returning moments later with 3 bottles of water and a bag of snacks. "All good," he said, starting the engine again. Attendant was half asleep, didn't even look up from his phone. Back on the road, they settled into a rhythm. Zoe eventually dozed off in the back seat, headphones still in place. Elena and Marcus maintained a quiet conversation, the kind that sometimes emerges between strangers thrown together in unusual circumstances. Careful at first, then gradually more revealing. She learned that before the accident, he had been something of a prodigy in marine engineering, designing innovations that made luxury yachts more fuel efficient. He'd met Laura in college. She was studying marine biology, shared his passion for the ocean. They'd built a good life, climbing steadily toward the American dream until the rainy night that shattered everything. The police said she swerved. "To avoid a deer," he said, voice flat as he recounted the worst moment of his life. "Car went through the guardrail. 50-foot drop to the rocks below." His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Zoe was in the back seat. Firefighters had to cut her out. She hasn't spoken a word since. "I'm so sorry," Elena whispered, the inadequate words all she had to offer. He nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy without dwelling on it. "Your turn," he said after a moment. "How does someone like you end up married to someone like Philip Westbrook?" The question wasn't accusatory, just quietly curious. Eleanor looked out the window at the darkened landscape, gathering her thoughts. "I was finishing my MBA," she began, working as an assistant curator at a small art museum to pay the bills. Philip came to a fundraiser, major donor, everyone fawning over him, except me. I knew nothing about him, treated him like any other guest. A small, sad smile touched her lips. He later told me that's what caught his attention. The woman who wasn't impressed by his money. She shifted in her seat, adjusting to the baby's weight. He was charming, brilliant even, sent flowers daily, remembered tiny details from our conversations, made me feel like the center of his universe. She paused. "That's how it starts, you know. They make you feel chosen, special. It's only later you realize it wasn't love. It was acquisition." Marcus nodded, understanding in his eyes. "When did it change?" "After the wedding. Small things at first. Suggestions about my clothes, monitoring my schedule, isolating me from friends who weren't good enough. Then criticism, constant subtle undermining. Her voice hardened. By the time he first raised his hand to me, I was already too entangled, financially dependent, cut off from support systems, convinced somehow it was all my fault. She rested her hand on her belly, feeling the baby shift. This little one was my wake-up call. I could endure it for myself, had convinced myself I deserved it somehow. But I couldn't let my child grow up in that environment, couldn't let them think that's what love looks like. The highway stretched empty before them, a ribbon of asphalt disappearing into darkness. Above, stars punctured the night sky with impossible clarity, the kind of view obscured by city lights and luxury living. "How did you start planning to leave?" Marcus asked, carefully, secretly. There was pride in her voice now. "I created a separate email account on library computers, gathered documentation of his abuse and financial crimes, connected with a domestic violence attorney who agreed to take my case pro bono." She paused. "I was going to testify in an ongoing SEC investigation against him. That's why he pushed me off that yacht. He found my hidden phone, saw the messages. Dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky, painting the horizon in delicate pinks and golds. They had driven through the night, making good time on empty roads. According to the dashboard GPS, they were now more than halfway to Bodega Bay. "We should stop soon," Marcus said. "Find somewhere to rest for a few hours. I know a turnout near a state park about 20 miles ahead. Quiet, off the main road." Eleanor nodded gratefully. The pregnancy made long periods of sitting uncomfortable, and despite her exhaustion, she needed to stretch. As they continued north, the landscape changed. More rugged coastline, denser forests, fewer signs of human habitation. The California that tourists rarely saw. The turnout Marcus had mentioned was perfect, a small gravel area overlooking a stretch of wild shoreline, screened from the road by towering redwoods. He parked facing the ocean, positioning the SUV, so they could see approaching vehicles. "Home for the next few hours," he said, cutting the engine. "Should be safe enough to grab some real sleep." In the back seat, Zoe stirred, blinking awake with the confusion of a child who had fallen asleep in one place and awakened in another. She rubbed her eyes, looking out at the unfamiliar surroundings. Then, to Elena's surprise, the girl tugged a small spiral notebook from her backpack and wrote something quickly, passing it forward. "Where are we now?" Eleanor read aloud. "About 30 miles south of Mendocino," Marcus answered, reaching back to squeeze his daughter's hand. "Remember that beach with the tide pools we visited last summer? Not far from there." Zoe nodded, seemingly satisfied. She wrote something else. "Is the baby okay?" The simple question brought unexpected tears to Elena's eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "The baby's fine. Thank you for asking." The girl studied Elena for a long moment, her solemn eyes taking in the disguised appearance, the protective hand on the pregnant belly, the weariness evident in her posture. Then she wrote again, "We won't let the bad man find you." Marcus read the note over Eleanor's shoulder, his expression a complex mixture of pride, sadness, and resolve. "No, we won't," he agreed quietly. "That's a promise, Seahorse." They ate a simple breakfast from the supplies Marcus had packed. Granola bars, apples, bottled water. Afterward, while Zoe explored the immediate area around the SUV, carefully, staying within sight as instructed, Elena and Marcus spread a map across the hood, plotting the remainder of their journey. "My contact has arranged a small rental cottage here." Marcus indicated a spot near the edge of Bodega Bay. "Used as a vacation rental usually, but vacant now in the off-season. Paid through a shell company he uses for property management. No connection to either of us." Eleanor traced the remaining route with her finger. "How much farther?" 4 hours, give or take. We'll be there by early afternoon if we leave soon." He folded the map carefully. "The cottage is stocked with basics. You'll be comfortable there until, he gestured toward her belly, until this little one decides to make an appearance. Elena completed the thought. She looked up at him, sudden concern furrowing her brow. Marcus, I've been focused on getting away, on keeping the baby safe. But I haven't really thought about what happens after, when I have evidence against Philip organized, when I'm ready to come forward. He understood immediately. He'll come after you with everything he has. She nodded grimly. And anyone who... Help me. Her eyes drifted to where Zoe was carefully examining a wildflower. I can't put you both at risk any longer than necessary. Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching his daughter. We knew what we were signing up for, he said finally. Well, I did, but Zoe... He hesitated. When she gave you that shell, when she offered her room, it was the first time since the accident that she's reached out to anyone new. Whatever risk we're taking, it's already been worth it to me for that alone. The simple honesty of his words struck Elena deeply. In her previous life, surrounded by wealth and power, relationships had always carried undercurrents of advantage and calculation. This straightforward kindness, asking nothing in return, felt almost foreign. Still, she insisted, once I'm settled, you should head back. Resume your normal life. If Philip ever connects you to my disappearance, we'll cross that bridge. When we come to it, Marcus interrupted gently. For now, let's just focus on getting you safely to Bodega Bay. As he spoke, a police cruiser appeared on the distant road, moving slowly along the coastal highway. Both adults tensed, watching its progress. The patrol car continued past the turnout without slowing, but the reminder of their vulnerability lingered. Time to move, Marcus said, calling Zoe back to the SUV. We've stayed in one place long enough. As they pulled back onto the coastal highway, Elena noticed a news alert flashing on Marcus's phone, which was mounted on the dashboard as a navigation aid. With a sense of dread, she tapped the notification. Search for missing pregnant socialite. Shifts to recovery operation, the headline read. Below it, a photo of Philip Westbrook at a press conference, his handsome face arranged in an expression of grief. The accompanying article quoted him directly. While we continue to hope for a miracle, we must face the possibility that my beloved wife and our unborn child have been lost to us. I am offering a substantial reward for recovery, for the closure our family desperately needs. Elena felt ice forming in her veins as she read the final lines. Sources close to the investigation reveal that security footage from nearby properties is being reviewed for any unusual activity around the time of Mrs. Westbrook's disappearance. Authorities urge anyone with information to come forward immediately. She met Marcus's gaze, seeing her own concern reflected there. The net was widening. Soon someone might remember a late-night commotion near a certain houseboat or the harbor. Patrol officer might recall the resident who had been oddly reluctant to allow a welfare check. Their head start was shrinking by the hour. The race north had become more urgent than ever. The coastal highway unfurled before them like a ribbon laid along the edge of the continent, sometimes hugging dramatic cliffs, other times dipping through small towns where life moved at a pace dictated by tide charts rather than stock markets. As they traveled further north, the landscape grew increasingly wild. Wind-swept cypresses bent permanently by ocean gales, vast stretches of untamed shoreline, fog that rolled in without warning to shroud everything in ethereal white. Elena found a strange comfort in the ruggedness of this landscape, so different from the manicured perfection of her previous life. There was honesty in its rawness, in the way the elements had shaped everything to their will rather than human desire. Beside her, Marcus drove with steady concentration, occasionally pointing out landmarks to Zoe through the rearview mirror or answering the questions she wrote in her notebook. They stopped only when necessary, once at a small grocery store, in a town whose name Elena didn't catch, where Marcus purchased additional supplies while she remained in the car with Zoe, head down, cap pulled low. The second stop was at a roadside medical clinic that advertised no appointment services. The need to check on the baby's well-being after her trauma outweighed the risk of being recognized. Dr. Sullivan, the receptionist called, using the fake name they'd given. "We're ready for you now." Elena followed the nurse to an examination room, heart pounding with anxiety, not just about the baby, but about maintaining her cover story. Marcus had coached her on the details, visiting from Seattle, experiencing some cramping while on a family camping trip, wanting reassurance before continuing their vacation. The doctor was a brisk, efficient woman in her 50s who introduced herself simply as Dr. Chen. She reviewed the intake form Elena had filled with carefully crafted half-truths, then conducted a thorough examination. "Baby's heartbeat is strong," she announced after using a Doppler to amplify the rapid underwater thrum. "Good positioning, good size for approximately 32 weeks. You're feeling regular movement?" Elena nodded, relief washing through her. "Yes, especially in the evenings. Any continued cramping since yesterday's fall?" "No, just soreness." Dr. Chen made notes in the chart. "Any other unusual symptoms? Headaches, vision changes, swelling in your extremities?" "Nothing unusual," Elena answered truthfully. The doctor studied her for a moment, her professional gaze seeming to look beyond the surface. "Mrs. Sullivan, is there anything else you'd like to tell me? Anything that might be relevant to your care?" Something in her tone, not accusatory but gently concerned, made Elena wonder if her disguise was as effective as she'd hoped. She hesitated, weighing the risk of disclosure against the importance of proper medical care. I'm under significant stress," she admitted carefully. "My husband and I are separated. The situation is complicated." Dr. Chen nodded, her expression neutral but understanding. Stress during pregnancy is a medical concern, not just an emotional one. "Are you safe currently?" "Yes," Elena said softly. "I am now." The doctor held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once. "Good. I'm going to give you my direct number along with some information about prenatal care in this region. I'd recommend a follow-up within 2 weeks." She wrote on a prescription pad, then tore off the page. "This includes some resources that might be generally helpful for your situation." Elena glanced at the paper. Alongside medical information, Dr. Chen had written the contact details for a women's resource center and a domestic violence advocacy group. "Thank you," Elena whispered. Folding the paper carefully, Dr. Chen's expression softened. "We're about 45 minutes from Bodega Bay here. If you decided to extend your vacation in this area, I have colleagues there who could provide continuity of care." The deliberate emphasis on vacation confirmed Elena's suspicion that the doctor had seen through their story. But instead of exposure, she was offering help, another unexpected ally. Back in the SUV, Elena shared the positive report with Marcus and Zoe, whose visible relief reminded her that she wasn't the only one invested in this unborn child's welfare. They had chosen to protect a stranger and her baby at considerable risk to themselves, a kind of selflessness Elena had rarely encountered in her previous life. As they approached Bodega Bay in the late afternoon, the fog that had threatened all day finally descended, enveloping the small coastal town in a thick white blanket that reduced visibility to mere yards. It was both a blessing and curse. The fog provided additional cover but made navigation to their destination more challenging. Marcus drove slowly through the small town center, past weathered buildings housing seafood restaurants, art galleries, and marine supply stores. Even through the fog, Elena could sense the character of the place, working docks alongside tourist attractions, fishing boats sharing harbor space with pleasure craft, a community where livelihoods were still tied directly to the sea. They turned onto a narrow road that wound away from the harbor, climbing slightly into the surrounding hills. The houses here were spaced further apart, many hidden behind gates or dense vegetation. After several minutes, Marcus turned again onto an unmarked gravel drive that twisted through a small grove of wind-gnarled pines before ending at a modest cottage. "This is it," he said, cutting the engine. "Home for now." The cottage was a single-story structure with cedar shingle siding weathered to a soft grey. A covered porch wrapped around two sides, offering views of the distant bay through the trees. It wasn't large or luxurious, but something about its sturdy presence against the elements spoke of sanctuary. "It's perfect," Elena breathed, a knot of tension she hadn't fully acknowledged beginning to loosen in her chest. Marcus retrieved a key from a lockbox mounted discreetly beside the door. Inside, the cottage was simply but comfortably furnished. There's an open-plan living area with a stone fireplace, a small but well-equipped kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom with a deep clawfoot tub. Large windows would have offered stunning views on a clear day, though now they showed only wisps of fog drifting among the pines. "My contact stocked the basics," Marcus explained, opening cupboards to reveal canned goods, pasta, rice, and other staples. "Fridge has some fresh stuff too. Should be enough for a few days until you can figure out a safer way to get supplies." Zoe wandered through the space, investigating every corner with the thorough curiosity of a child. She seemed particularly taken with a window seat overlooking a small garden, immediately claiming it by placing her backpack there. Elena stood in the center of the living room, overwhelmed by the sudden realization that she had made it. She was safe, at least temporarily, beyond Philip's immediate reach. After months of careful planning, followed by the terror of his discovery and her near death in the harbor, this quiet cottage represented her first real breath of freedom. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, voice catching. "Both of you." Marcus shook his head, uncomfortable with gratitude as always. "Let's get settled first. I need to send my contact a message letting him know we arrived safely. Then we can figure out next steps." While Marcus handled communications and Zoe explored the garden, Elena took a much-needed shower, letting hot water wash away the physical residue of their journey. Afterward, dressed in clean borrowed clothes, she found herself standing before the bathroom mirror, studying her transformed appearance. The woman who looked back at her bore little resemblance to Elena Westbrook, trophy wife and socialite. This woman had simpler hair, bare face, eyes that held both wariness and determination. She placed both hands on her rounded belly, feeling the reassuring movement within. "We made it, little one," she whispered. "First step done." That evening, they shared a simple meal around the cottage's small dining table. The domesticity of the scene, Marcus teaching Zoe how to play checkers afterward, the crackling fire, mugs of hot chocolate, created an illusion of normalcy that was both comforting and strange. As darkness fell and the fog thickened, the cottage became an island of warmth in an invisible sea. Zoe eventually fell asleep on the sofa, the journey's excitement finally catching up with her. Marcus carried her to the second bedroom, returning to find Elena standing by the window, staring into the mist. "You should rest too," he said quietly. "It's been a long couple of days." Elena nodded without turning. "I know, I will, She gestured vaguely at the window. "I keep expecting to see him out there. Philip, even though I know it's impossible, there's no way he could have tracked us." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Maybe that feeling never goes away when you've lived with someone capable of what he did." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "After Laura died," he said finally, "I used to think I saw her everywhere, in crowds, through windows, just at the edge of my vision. For months, I'd turn suddenly, certain she was there, and feel the loss all over again when it wasn't her." He moved to stand beside Elena, looking out at the nothingness beyond the glass. "Different circumstances, but maybe a similar feeling. Your mind is adjusting to a fundamental change in reality. The comparison struck Elena as oddly fitting. Does it get easier? She asked softly. Not easier, he replied. Different. You build a new normal around the change. He hesitated. For what it's worth, this place is secure. My contact used pseudonyms for the rental agreement. Utilities are paid through a management company. The nearest neighbor is half a mile away. If you're careful, you can stay off the radar here until the baby comes. Elena turned to him. And then what? You've thought that far ahead, haven't you? Marcus rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she'd come to recognize as accompanying difficult topics. My contact knows someone at the county health department. Could potentially help with obtaining a birth certificate under your new identity. After that, he shrugged. Depends on what you want. Keep hiding or fight back. The question hung in the air between them. Elena had been so focused on escape, on protecting her unborn child, that she hadn't fully considered the long-term future. A lifetime in hiding under a false identity, or a public battle against one of the most powerful men in the country? I need time to think, she said honestly, to weigh options once the baby is safe. Marcus nodded. That's why we brought you here, to give you that time. He glanced toward the room where Zoe slept. We should head back soon, though. Day after tomorrow at the latest. The longer we're away from Newport, the more questions might be asked. The reminder that their time together was limited sent an unexpected pang through Elena. These strangers had become her lifeline, her protectors, perhaps even friends. The thought of facing the coming weeks alone in this isolated cottage was suddenly daunting. I understand, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. You've already risked so much. I can't ask for more. Marcus studied her face. It's not about what you're asking, he said quietly. It's about what's right. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a prepaid cell phone. This is programmed with my number. A separate prepaid I'll keep hidden. If you need anything at all, you call, day or night. Elena took the phone, the simple plastic device representing a lifeline to the outside world. Thank you. I've also written down local emergency contacts, the information for my contact here, who will check on you periodically, and he hesitated. The number for a lawyer friend in San Francisco. Former client specializes in high-conflict divorce and protective orders. If you decide to fight rather than hide, she'd be a good first call. The thoroughness of his preparation touched her deeply. This man, barely keeping his own life together, had thought through scenarios for her safety and future that she herself hadn't had the capacity to consider. Why are you doing all this? She asked, the question that had hovered since he'd pulled her from the water, finally finding voice. You've turned your life upside down, put yourself and Zoe at risk, all for a stranger. Why? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze shifting to a framed photo of Zoe and a woman Elena assumed was Laura, the only personal item he'd brought from the houseboat and placed on the cottage's mantel. When Laura died, he said finally, I was drowning. Not literally like you were, but drowning all the same, in grief, in bills, in the impossible task of helping a traumatized child when I could barely function myself. His voice remained steady, but Elena could hear the carefully controlled emotion beneath. There were people who threw me lifelines when I needed them most. A former professor who gave me work when no one else would. A neighbor who watched Zoe when I couldn't afford childcare. A doctor who provided therapy at reduced rates. He turned to her, his expression both pained and resolute. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to be someone else's lifeline, I wouldn't hesitate. Not because I'm a hero, I'm not, but because that's how the broken parts of the world get mended. One person reaching out to another. The simple honesty of his answer brought tears to Elena's eyes. In the rarefied world she'd inhabited as Philip's wife, such straightforward goodness had been almost non-existent. Relationships were transactional, kindness was calculated, helping others was done publicly for the associated praise. This quieter form of decency, helping because it was right with no expectation of return, felt revolutionary. "I think," she said softly, "your daughter is very lucky to have you as her father." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'm the lucky one." He glanced at his watch. "It's late, you should try to sleep. Tomorrow we'll go over everything you need to know about the cottage, the area, and emergency protocols." As he turned to go, Eleanor reached out impulsively, catching his hand. "Marcus." He paused, looking back at her. "Whatever happens next, I want you to know that you did save me. Not just from the water, but from believing that there's no goodness left in the world." His fingers tightened briefly around hers, then released. "Get some rest, Elena," he said gently. "Tomorrow's another day." As she lay in bed later, listening to the distant sound of waves beyond the fog, Elena placed her hands on her belly, feeling the rhythmic movements of her child. For the first time since discovering her pregnancy, she allowed herself to imagine a future where both of them were truly free, not just from Philip's immediate threat, but from the shadow his power had cast across her life. That future remains uncertain, filled with challenges she had yet to face. But in this moment, in this cottage hidden by fog and distance, she had found something previously unimaginable, a place to breathe, to plan, to hope. Outside, the fog continued its silent dance among the pines, a natural cloak protecting the small sanctuary where three unlikely allies had created a temporary haven against the storms of their lives. The fog lifted the next morning, revealing a stunning panorama of Bodega Bay from the cottage windows. Sunlight sparkled on distant water, illuminating fishing vessels as they made their way out to sea. The dramatic coastline stretched north and south, rugged cliffs alternating with secluded beaches accessible only at low tide. Under different circumstances, it might have felt like a vacation retreat. Elena woke early, her back aching from the pregnancy. She found Marcus already in the kitchen, methodically organizing supplies into labeled cabinets. A detailed map of the area was spread across the counter, key locations marked in his precise handwriting. Medical center, police station, grocery store, alternate routes out of town. "Morning," he said, sliding a cup of decaf coffee toward her. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Where's Zoe?" "Exploring the garden. There's a family of quail she's been sketching." His expression softened. "She seems happy here." Elena nodded, sensing the weight behind his observation. "Marcus, about going back to Newport." "We need to," he said firmly. "The longer I'm away from work, the more questions will be asked. Zoe needs to return to school. And most importantly, if anyone connects us to your disappearance..." He didn't finish the thought, but didn't need to. "I know," Elena agreed quietly. I'm afraid for you both. If Philip ever discovers your involvement..." "He won't," Marcus interrupted. "We'll maintain our normal routine. Weekend camping trip, nothing unusual. I've done nothing that would appear suspicious on camera. Bought supplies with cash, kept my face down in public places." He tapped the map. "Right. Now you need to focus on staying safe and healthy until the baby comes." Their conversation was interrupted by Zoe, who entered carrying her sketchbook, which she proudly opened to show Elena. The page revealed a remarkably detailed drawing of a quail family. The male's distinctive head plume, the female's protective stance, tiny chicks huddled beneath her wings. "This is beautiful," Elena said sincerely. "You have a real talent, Zoe." The girl beamed, then turned to a fresh page and began to write. When she finished, she pushed the notebook toward Elena. "I made this for the baby to look at." Beneath the words, she'd drawn a small, perfect seahorse, Elena felt her eyes fill with tears. "The baby will love it," she whispered. "Thank you." Zoe studied Elena for a moment, then wrote again, "What will you name the baby?" The simple question caught Elena off guard. She hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead, had been too focused on survival. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "I've been waiting to meet her first." Zoe nodded seriously, then wrote one more note. "She will be brave like you." The child's perception cut straight to Elena's heart. She hadn't felt brave, desperate, terrified, reactive, but not brave. Yet through Zoe's eyes, her actions represented courage rather than mere survival. The morning passed in practical preparation. Marcus taught Elena the cottage's quirks, which windows stuck, how to restart the finicky water heater, where the breaker box was located. He showed her hiding places he'd identified if someone unexpected came calling, and escape routes through the back garden that led to a hiking trail in the pines. By midday, they'd created contingency plans for various scenarios, most of which Elena hoped would never materialize. She had memorized key phone numbers, studied the map until she could visualize every road, and learned basic operational security, varying her routine, watching for surveillance, communicating securely. "You'd make a good spy," she joked weakly, trying to lighten the mood as they reviewed everything one final time. Marcus smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Just someone who's learned to be careful," he replied. "One last thing." He handed her a small leather pouch. "Emergency cash, $2,000. Not enough to start a new life, but enough to get you out of a bad situation if necessary." Elena started to protest, knowing what that amount must mean to him, but he shook his head firmly. "Please, it helps me to know you have it." "I'll pay you back," she promised. "Once this is all over, once I have access to my resources again. That's not why I'm giving it to you." His quiet dignity silenced her objections. This man who had so little was giving her what might represent months of savings, not out of obligation, but because it was the right thing to do. After lunch, the inevitable moment of departure drew closer. Zoe packed her small backpack carefully, including the drawings she hadn't given to Elena. For a child who didn't speak, she communicated more eloquently through her actions than many adults Elena had known. Standing on the cottage porch, the afternoon sun warm on their faces, the trio faced the reality of separation. Marcus went through final instructions when his contact would check in, which days the clinic was open, how to reach him in a true emergency. Elena listened, nodding at appropriate moments, but her attention was caught by Zoe, who stood slightly apart, her expression solemn as she studied the cottage and surrounding landscape, as if committing everything to memory. "We should go," Marcus said finally, keys in hand. "Beat the traffic back to Newport." Elena knelt awkwardly to Zoe's level, her pregnancy making the movement ungainly. "Thank you for everything," she said softly, "especially the seahorse. I'll keep it safe until you visit again." Zoe surprised her by stepping forward and wrapping thin arms around Elena's neck in a fierce hug. The child held on longer than expected, her small body conveying what her voice could not. When she stepped back, her eyes were bright with unspilled tears. Rising, Elena turned to Marcus, suddenly finding herself without adequate words. "I don't know how to—" "Don't," he interrupted gently. "Just stay safe, both of you." His eyes dropped to her belly momentarily. "Call if you need anything. I mean it. Anything at all." "I will," she promised. He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then simply nodded. "We'll check in when we can. Safely." As they walked toward the SUV, Zoe turned back repeatedly, waving smaller and smaller goodbyes until Marcus gently guided her into the vehicle. Elena remained on the porch, waving in return, until the SUV disappeared down the gravel drive, leaving only a faint dust cloud hanging in the afternoon light. The silence that followed their departure was profound. Standing alone on the porch, Elena felt the full weight of her situation descend. For all the preparation, all the planning, the reality of isolation struck her with physical force. Her hand went instinctively to her belly, seeking the reassurance of her child's movement. "It's just us now, little one," she whispered. Inside the cottage, evidence of their brief time together remained. Zoe's drawing of the Quayle family left deliberately on the coffee table. Marcus's. Elena moved through the rooms, familiarizing herself with what would be her home for the coming weeks. The cottage was comfortable, adequate, safe. Everything she needed physically. Yet as evening approached, bringing with it a chill that prompted her to light the fireplace as Marcus had shown her, she couldn't shake a growing sense of vulnerability. Not physical danger. The cottage was secure, hidden, far from Philip's sphere of influence. This was a deeper isolation, emotional rather than geographical. For years, even in the darkest moments of her marriage, she'd been surrounded by people, staff, social connections, the constant noise of wealth and status. Now, in this quiet cottage at the edge of the continent, she faced herself without distraction. As darkness fell, Eleanor made a simple dinner from the supplies Marcus had organized. She ate at the small dining table, the empty chairs across from her stark reminders of absence. Through the windows, stars emerged in a clarity she had rarely seen, unpolluted by city lights. Later, preparing for bed, Elena caught her reflection. In the bathroom mirror, the woman looking back at her was neither Elena Westbrook, socialite wife, nor the persona she'd adopted for their journey north. This woman existed in between identities, no longer who she had been, not yet who she would become. She placed both hands on her rounded belly, feeling her daughter shift beneath her touch. "We're going to be okay," she told her reflection, willing herself to believe it. "This is just the beginning." The days at the cottage settled into a careful rhythm. Elena established routines that balanced security with necessary engagement with the outside world. She ventured into town infrequently, always with her disguise carefully maintained, hair tucked under a nondescript cap, body obscuring clothes, sunglasses even on cloudy days. She became Rebecca Sullivan in these moments, a quiet pregnant woman staying at a vacation rental, unremarkable and forgettable. The small grocery store became her primary connection to Bodega Bay's community, a place where she could exchange brief pleasantries with locals without revealing anything meaningful about herself. The elderly cashier who inevitably commented on her growing belly, the fisherman who recommended which catch was best that day. The librarian suggested books when she mentioned having time to read while on vacation. Small human interactions that kept total isolation at bay. 2 weeks after Marcus and Zoe's departure, Elena received her first communication from them, a postcard showing California redwoods with a brief, anonymous message. "Weather good, garden growing. Hope you're enjoying the coast." It was signed simply M&Z, but included a small drawing of a seahorse in the corner that made Elena's eyes fill with tears. She propped the postcard on the cottage's small mantel, a talisman against loneliness. That night, she used the prepaid phone to send a text to Marcus's matching burner. "Beautiful here, making friends with local Quayle family. We're both healthy and safe." The next day, Eleanor had her first appointment with Dr. Chen's colleague in Bodega Bay, a maternal fetal specialist named Dr. Rivera. The woman reviewed her case with professional detachment, making no comment on the obvious discrepancies in Elena's paperwork, the absence of previous medical records, the wedding ring she no longer wore. "Blood pressure looks good. Baby's growth is on track." Dr. Rivera noted, reviewing the ultrasound she'd just completed. "I'd estimate you're about 34 weeks now. Getting close." Elena nodded, watching the monitor where her daughter's profile was. Clearly visible, the curve of her forehead, the tiny hand near her face, the rhythmic flutter of her heart. "Have you given thought to your birth plan?" the doctor asked, her tone deliberately casual. "The hospital is about 20 minutes from your rental, but given your situation, perhaps you'd prefer to discuss alternatives." The careful phrasing confirmed what Elena had suspected. Dr. Chen had communicated something of her circumstances to her colleague, creating another quiet ally in her network of safety. "What alternatives would you recommend?" Elena asked cautiously. Dr. Rivera cleaned the ultrasound gel from Elena's belly before responding. "There's a birthing center attached to my practice. More private than the hospital, less paperwork, but still medically sound. We have arrangements for emergency transfer if complications arise." She made a note in the chart. "For women in transitional situations, it often provides the best balance of safety and proper care." The deliberate vagueness of transitional situations was a kindness, allowing Elena her privacy while acknowledging the reality of her circumstances. "That sounds ideal," Elena agreed softly. "Thank you." The doctor nodded, then reached into a desk drawer and withdrew a business card. "This is my personal cell number. When labor begins, call directly rather than going through the office. Day or night," another act of compassion, another small safety net being woven around her. As her pregnancy advanced, Elena's world both contracted and expanded in unexpected ways. The physical limitations of late pregnancy kept her closer to the cottage, yet her awareness of the natural world around her deepened. She noticed things she would have overlooked in her previous life. The family of deer that visited the garden at dawn, the changing patterns of stars overhead, the subtle shift in temperature that signaled approaching autumn. She began keeping a journal, documenting not just her physical changes, but her emotional evolution. Writing became both therapy and preparation, a way to process the trauma she'd endured and a record for her daughter someday, explaining the choices that had brought them to this place. "I want you to know," she wrote one evening as rain tapped gently against the cottage windows, "that I wasn't always strong. For too long, I mistook control for love, mistook silence for peace. I allowed myself to become smaller to accommodate someone else's need for power. But you changed everything. The moment I knew you existed, I found courage I didn't know I possessed. You saved me before I saved you." 3 weeks into her stay, the cottage received an unexpected visitor. Eleanor was preparing lunch when she heard a vehicle on the gravel drive, not the familiar sound of her contact's truck that came every Tuesday with fresh supplies. Heart racing, she moved to the window, positioning herself to see without being seen. A woman emerged from a modest sedan, older, gray-haired, carrying a wicker basket. Elena recognized her from the grocery store, the grandmother who worked the register on weekends. Instinctively, Elena moved toward the back door, prepared to use one of the escape routes Marcus had shown her. Then she paused, watching as the woman simply left the basket on the porch, returned to her car, and drove away. No attempt to knock or peer through windows, just the basket, left like an offering. After waiting a cautious 15 minutes, Eleanor ventured onto the porch. The basket contained fresh baked goods, a jar of homemade jam, a small bouquet of wildflowers, and a handwritten note. "From the Bodega Bay Women's Circle. When you're ready, we're here." The simple message brought tears to her eyes. Somehow, through some quiet network of observation and intuition, the women of this small coastal town had identified her situation and reached out in the most non-threatening way possible, offering connection without demanding explanation. That night, Elena called Marcus for the first time since their separation. "Is everything okay?" He answered immediately, voice tense with concern. "Yes," she assured him. "Everything's fine. The baby's doing well. She hesitated, unsure how to express what she was feeling. "The people here, they somehow know. Not the details, just that I'm hiding from something, and they're helping in small ways, protecting me without asking questions." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Small towns can be like that," he said finally, "especially places where people still depend on each other to survive. They recognize when someone needs shelter." "How are you?" Elena asked, shifting the subject. "And Zoe?" "We're managing," he replied, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. "Zoe asks about you, in her way, draws pictures of the cottage, of quail families. And work?" Another hesitation. "It's been challenging. My boss wasn't thrilled about the unplanned time off. Hours got cut back." He cleared his throat. "But we're fine, truly." Elena closed her eyes, guilt washing over her. This man who had risked everything to help her was now paying a tangible price for his kindness. "Marcus," she began, but he interrupted. "Gently. Don't, please. It's temporary and worth it to know you're both safe." They spoke for a few minutes more. Careful conversation that avoided specifics, focused on well-being rather than details that might compromise either of them if the call was somehow monitored. Before hanging up, Elena found herself saying, "I miss you both," the truth of it surprising her with its intensity. "We miss you too," he replied softly. "Stay safe." As her due date approached, Elena felt a shift in her perspective. The immediate terror of Philip's attempt on her life had receded enough to allow strategic thinking about the future. She spent hours organizing the evidence she had managed to preserve. Photographs of injuries, carefully backed up to her plan was taking shape, not just escape, but justice. Once the baby was born safely, once she had recovered enough strength, she would connect with the lawyer Marcus had recommended. Not to hide indefinitely, but to fight back with the full force of truth. The baby seemed to sense her mother's renewed determination, becoming more active, more insistent in her movements. "Soon," Elena would whisper, placing her hand over a particularly vigorous kick. "Soon we'll both be truly free." On a clear October morning, Elena woke to a different kind of sensation. A tightening across her abdomen that came and went with increasing regularity. She had read enough to recognize early labor, to understand that her body was beginning the process that would bring her daughter into the world. With careful deliberation, she packed the small bag she had prepared for this moment. She called Dr. Rivera, speaking calmly about her symptoms. She secured the cottage, making sure all evidence of her real identity was safely hidden. Then, as another contraction gripped her, Elena placed both hands on her belly and made a solemn promise. "I will give you a world where you never have to be afraid, where your voice is never silenced, where your worth is never questioned." The next chapter of their story was about to begin. The birthing center was exactly as Dr. Rivera had described, intimate, calm, medical equipment present, but unobtrusive. Elena's labor progressed steadily through the afternoon and into evening, her body working with ancient wisdom to bring new life into the world. Unlike the luxury hospital suite Philip had selected for his heir's arrival, with its excessive amenities and parade of specialists, this space offered something more valuable: safety and genuine care. Dr. Rivera remained present throughout, her quiet competence a steadying force. A midwife named Lucia provided constant support, guiding Elena through each intensifying contraction with gentle encouragement. "You're doing beautifully," Lucia murmured as Elena paced the room, pausing to breathe through waves of pain. "Your body knows exactly what to do." As twilight settled over Bodega Bay, the contractions grew stronger, closer together. Elena found herself drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Each breath, each moment of pain had purpose, bringing her daughter closer to a world where no one could harm her. "I wish someone was here," she admitted during a brief respite, vulnerability breaking through her careful self-sufficiency. Someone who... She didn't finish the thought, but the image in her mind was clear. Marcus's steady presence, Zoe's solemn, watchful eyes. Lucia squeezed her hand. "You're not alone," she said firmly. "We're right here with you." At 9:47 p.m., after a final tremendous effort that called upon every ounce of Elena's determination, her daughter slipped into the world with a powerful cry of protest and indignation. The sound, strong, defiant, unmistakably alive, broke. Something open in Elena's heart. "She's perfect," Dr. Rivera announced, placing the squirming wet infant on Elena's chest. "Absolutely perfect." Elena stared in wonder at the tiny being now cradled against her skin. The dark, damp hair, the fists clenched in outrage at the cold new world, the eyes squinting open to take their first bewildered look at existence. After everything, the fear, the flight, the terrible night in the harbor, here was this miracle, breathing and whole. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You made it. We both did." The next hours passed in, a blur of first examinations, first feeding, first quiet moments of bonding. The baby, 7 pounds, 4 ounces of perfect health, latched eagerly. Her tiny hand pressed against Elena's chest as if to ensure her mother wouldn't disappear. Dawn was breaking when Dr. Rivera returned for a final check before discharge. The careful protocols they had established meant minimizing time in any official facility, returning to the privacy of the cottage as soon as medically advisable. "Have you decided on a name?" the doctor asked as she completed her examination. Of the newborn, Elena nodded, stroking her daughter's cheek with gentle fingers. "Hope," she said softly. "Her name is Hope." It wasn't the sophisticated name she and Philip had discussed in those early days of pregnancy. No family legacy, no strategic social advantage. Just the simple truth of what this child represented. In her life, Hope, Dr. Rivera repeated, smiling. Perfect. She completed the minimal paperwork they had agreed upon, enough to document the birth without creating records that could be easily traced. The birth certificate will be processed through alternative channels, as we discussed. Your friend's contact at the county office will ensure it's official without raising flags. Elena nodded gratefully. "And medically?" "I'll want to see you. Both in 1 week. Sooner if you notice any concerns." The doctor hesitated. "The cottage is comfortable, but are you sure you don't want someone staying with you these first days? The women's circle I mentioned has volunteers who—" "Thank you, but no," Elena interrupted gently. "The fewer connections, the safer we are. Right now." Dr. Rivera nodded in understanding. "Call any time, day or night." By mid-morning, Elena and Hope were settled back at the cottage, the outside world held at bay by drawn curtains and locked doors. In the soft light of the bedroom, Elena marveled at her daughter's perfection, the delicate eyebrows, the impossibly tiny fingernails, the rosebud mouth that occasionally worked in sleep, as if practicing expressions for later use. "Your father will never touch you," she promised in a fierce whisper. "Never control you, never make you doubt yourself." Hope slept peacefully, untroubled by the weight of the vow or the circumstances of her birth. For her, the world was still. Simple, warmth, milk, the sound of her mother's heartbeat. That evening, when Hope was settled in the Moses basket Marcus's contact had provided, Elena made 2 calls. The first was to Dr. Rivera, a brief update confirming their safe return and comfortable settling. The second, hands trembling slightly, was to the prepaid phone Marcus carried. He answered on the first ring. "Elena, is everything okay?" "She's here," Elena said, voice catching. "Hope arrived last night, 7 pounds, 4 ounces. She's healthy and perfect and beautiful." The silence on the other end lasted just a beat too long. "Hope," he repeated finally, his voice rough with emotion. "That's a beautiful name." "I wanted you to know," Elena continued. "You and Zoe were such a big part of bringing her safely into this world. Is there anything you need?" he asked, practical as always, even as she heard the underlying emotion. "We're managing," she assured him. "The doctor was wonderful. We're back at the cottage now, getting to know each other." Another pause. "I wish we could see her," he said quietly. The simple honesty of his statement caught Eleanor off guard. "I wish that too," she admitted. "More than I expected." They talked a few minutes longer, careful conversation that shared joy while acknowledging the reality of their separation. Before they disconnected, Marcus said, "Tell Hope that her friends from the south send their love, and that there's a new drawing of a seahorse waiting for her wall." The days that followed established new rhythms, dictated by Hope's needs, feeding, changing, brief periods of alert curiosity, followed by deep newborn sleep. Elena marveled at how completely this tiny being commanded her world, how the universe had narrowed to the cottage walls, yet somehow expanded to contain infinite new emotions. Nights were the hardest. While Hope slept in her basket beside the bed, Elena found herself listening to every sound, startling at creaks in the old cottage's frame, imagining dangers lurking beyond the windows. Not just the specific threat of Philip, but the generalized vulnerability of new motherhood, the sudden, overwhelming responsibility for a life entirely dependent on her protection. 1 week after the birth, Dr. Rivera visited for a follow-up examination, pronouncing both mother and baby in excellent health. She brought with her a small package, the official birth certificate for Hope Sullivan, with Elena's alias, Rebecca Sullivan, listed as mother, father, unknown. The document represented both safety and sacrifice, protection for Hope, but erasure of her true identity. "It's temporary," Dr. Rivera reminded her gently, seeing Elena's complicated expression. "When the time is right, when it's safe, you can establish the truth." That night, cradling Hope during a late feeding, Elena made a decision. The evidence she had gathered against Philip was substantial, but not yet organized into the strongest possible case. With Hope's arrival, her motivation had sharpened, her determination crystallized. She would not spend her daughter's childhood looking over her shoulder, waiting for Philip to find them. She would not surrender Hope's future to fear. Instead, she would fight, strategically, methodically, publicly if necessary, to ensure their freedom permanently. The next morning, Eleanor called the lawyer Marcus had recommended, Catherine Zhang of Zhang and Associates in San Francisco, specializing in high-conflict divorce and protection cases. "I understand you're a friend of Marcus Calloway," she said when the call connected. "I need help with a complicated situation." The lawyer's voice was crisp, professional. "Mr. Calloway mentioned you might call. He spoke very highly of your situation, though he was deliberately vague on details." "For good reason," Elena replied. "My name is Elena Westbrook. According to current news reports, I drowned in Newport Harbor 2 months ago. But 2 months ago. There was a moment of startled silence before the lawyer's training reasserted itself. "I see," she said carefully. "And the person who reported your drowning would be my husband, Philip Westbrook, who pushed me off his yacht after discovering I planned to leave him and expose his abuse." Another pause. "Mrs. Westbrook, these are extremely serious allegations against a very powerful individual. Before we continue, I need to be certain you understand the ramifications of pursuing this matter." Eleanor looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her arms, unaware of the momentous conversation taking place. "I understand completely," she said firmly. "I'm not just fighting for myself anymore. I have evidence. documented abuse, financial crimes, witness statements, and I have a newborn daughter who deserves a life without fear. A daughter? Zhang's voice softened slightly. That changes the legal landscape considerably. Her name is Hope, Elena said, and she's why I can't stay hidden forever. The conversation that followed was detailed, pragmatic, focused on building a case that could withstand the inevitable counterattack from Philip's legal team. Zhang outlined a process that would begin with confidential filings, leverage the existing SEC investigation, and coordinate with domestic violence advocates to ensure maximum protection. This won't be quick, the lawyer cautioned, and it certainly won't be easy. Mr. Westbrook will use every resource at his disposal. I understand, Eleanor replied. I'm prepared for whatever comes next. As she ended the call, Eleanor felt something shift within her, fear giving way to purpose, victimhood transforming into advocacy. The path ahead would be difficult, perhaps dangerous, but for the first time since fleeing Newport, she was moving forward rather than simply hiding. Hope stirred in her arms, tiny fists stretching in a perfect yawn before settling back to sleep. Elena pressed a gentle kiss to her daughter's forehead. The hard part is just beginning, she whispered, but so is everything good. November brought storms to the California coast, fierce winds that bent the pines around the cottage and drove rain against the windows in relentless sheets. Hope thrived despite the tumult, growing stronger daily, her personality emerging. In small, distinct ways, the serious concentration when she nursed, the way her eyes tracked light and movement, her preference for being carried facing outward to observe the world. Elena and Catherine Zhang had established a secure communication system, exchanging information through encrypted channels as they built their case against Philip. The lawyer's initial skepticism had transformed into determined advocacy as she reviewed Elena's evidence. Photos documenting physical abuse, recordings of threats, financial records showing systematic fraud. We're making progress, Zhang reported during their weekly call. The SEC investigation has expanded based on the information you provided. 2 former employees have come forward with corroborating testimony. And security? Elena asked. Her primary concern was always Hope's safety. Still no indication that Westbrook suspects you survived, Zhang assured her. The private investigator he hired to find closure focused on recovery efforts in the harbor, then expanded to nearby coastal areas. No sign they're looking at Northern California. This careful progress brought Elena both relief and increased tension. The case was building, but each step toward justice was also a step toward inevitable confrontation. Some days, watching Hope sleep peacefully in her basket, Elena questioned her decision to fight rather than simply disappear with her daughter into a new identity. But then she would remember Philip's cold calculation as he pushed her overboard, his absolute certainty that his wealth and power placed him above consequences, and her resolve would harden again. On a particularly wild Thursday evening, as rain lashed the cottage and wind howled through the pines, Eleanor was settling Hope after a feeding when she heard an unexpected sound beneath the storm's chaos. Tires on the gravel drive. Her heart raced as she quickly placed Hope in her basket and moved to the window, peering carefully through the edge of the curtain. A familiar SUV was making its way toward the cottage, headlights cutting through the rain. For a moment, Elena couldn't process what she was seeing. It seemed impossible, a hallucination born of loneliness. Then the vehicle stopped, and 2 figures emerged, hunched against the downpour. Marcus, she whispered, disbelieving. Zoe. Elena flung open the door just as they reached the porch, rain blowing sideways into the cottage. "What are you doing here?" she gasped. "Is everything okay?" They hurried inside, dripping on the entryway floor, Marcus looking exhausted, Zoe solemn but with bright, eager eyes scanning the room. "I'm sorry for not calling first," Marcus said, helping Zoe out of her raincoat. "But things happened quickly. We needed to move." His expression was grim despite the warmth in his eyes at seeing her. "What things?" Elena asked, alarm rising. "What happened?" Marcus ran a hand through his wet hair. "Two men came asking questions at the marina. Not police, private. They had photos of you from the night you—" He hesitated. "The night you fell." Asked if anyone remembered disturbances, unusual activity. He met her gaze directly. "They specifically asked about residents with small boats who might have been out late." Elena felt ice form in her veins. "They suspect I survived. They're exploring the possibility," Marcus confirmed. "So far, it seems routine, covering all bases in an ongoing investigation." But it felt too close. He glanced toward the bedroom, where Hope's basket was visible. "Is that—" Elena's tension momentarily gave way to something warmer. "Yes, that's Hope." She motioned them forward. "Come meet her." Zoe moved first, approaching the sleeping infant with an expression of wonder. She stood perfectly still beside the basket, studying the tiny features with intense concentration. After a long moment, she pulled a folded paper from her pocket and carefully placed it beside Hope. A drawing of a seahorse, more detailed than the first one she'd made. "She remembered," Elena whispered, emotion tightening her throat. Marcus hung back slightly, but his eyes were fixed on the newborn. "She's beautiful," he said softly. "She looks like you." The simple observation, so normal, so ordinary in most circumstances, struck Elena with unexpected force. No one had said those words to her yet. No family had cooed over resemblances or debated inherited features. This moment, that should have been commonplace, was her first experience of shared joy in her daughter's existence. "Thank you," she managed. Then gathering herself, "Now tell me everything. Why are you really here? How long can you stay?" Over mugs of tea at the kitchen table, with the storm raging outside, Marcus explained the developments that had driven them north. Not just the investigators asking questions, but a more immediate concern. Zoe had begun writing notes at school that mentioned Elena and the baby. Her teacher, worried about what appeared to be an imaginary pregnant friend in potential danger, had scheduled a meeting with school counselors. "I couldn't risk it," Marcus said. One well-meaning intervention, one call to family services, asking about Zoe's home situation, and everything unravels. Eleanor understood immediately. For a single father already under scrutiny, already living on the financial edge, such attention could be disastrous. "So you just left?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "Called in sick again. Packed what we could, used cash for gas." He hesitated. "It's not permanent. Just until we figure out next steps. I can find work anywhere with boats." The implications settled heavily between them. Marcus and Zoe had essentially fled their home, abandoned their fragile stability, potentially sacrificed their future in Newport, all to protect Elena and Hope. "You could have warned me," Elena said, though there was no accusation in her tone. "You didn't have to come here." "Yes, we did," Marcus replied simply. Zoe, who had been quietly drawing at the table, pushed a note toward Eleanor. "We belong together, all four of us." The child's straightforward assessment, honest in that way only children can be, brought fresh tears to Elena's eyes. Because despite the circumstances, despite the danger and uncertainty, Zoe was right. Somehow, against all odds, these four broken people had formed a unit, a connection that transcended conventional relationships. "You can stay as long as you need," Elena said, reaching out to squeeze Zoe's hand. "There's plenty of room." Later that night, with Zoe asleep in the second bedroom and Hope settled after her late feeding, Elena and Marcus sat before the fireplace, speaking in low voices to avoid disturbing either child. "I need to call Zhang," Elena said. "If Philip is starting to question the drowning narrative, we may need to accelerate our timeline." Marcus nodded. The longer his suspicion grows, the more resources he'll dedicate to searching. A man like that doesn't accept loose ends. Eleanor studied his profile in the firelight. The strong jaw, the tired eyes, the weight of responsibility evident in his posture. Why did you really come back, Marcus? The truth. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the flames dance over the logs. After we left, he said finally, Zoe started having nightmares again. The kind she had right after Laura died. She'd wake up crying, silent crying, but tears streaming down her face. He swallowed hard. Then one night, she wrote me a note. It said, "What if the bad man finds them first? What if we're not there to help?" Elena's heart constricted. Oh, Marcus. Oh, Marcus. I tried to reassure her, but he shook his head. The truth is, I was having the same thoughts, worrying about you both. When those investigators showed up, it just confirmed what we already felt. He met her gaze directly. We couldn't stay away, not when things might be closing in, not when you might need us. The simple admission, free of artifice or calculation, moved her deeply. This man, who had already sacrificed so much, had chosen to risk everything again, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. I'm glad you're here, she whispered. Both of you. I missed you more than I realized. Something shifted in his expression, a softening that might have led to more if Hope hadn't chosen that moment to wake with a hungry cry. The interruption broke the intensity of the moment, returning them to the practical realities of their situation. Get some rest, Elena said, rising to tend to her daughter. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. As she fed Hope in the quiet darkness of her room, Elena felt the cottage transform around her, from sanctuary to something more complex, more complete. The addition of Marcus and Zoe changed everything, introducing new variables, new risks, but also new possibilities. For the first time since fleeing Newport, Eleanor allowed herself to imagine a future that included not just safety and justice, but genuine connection. A future where Hope would have not only a mother's fierce protection, but also the quiet strength of a man like Marcus and the solemn loyalty of a child like Zoe. It was a dangerous hope, perhaps, fragile as a seahorse drawn on paper, vulnerable to the storms still gathering on their horizon. But as rain continued to lash the cottage and wind howled through the pines, the four unlikely allies slept under one roof, united by choice rather than circumstance, stronger together than apart. Outside, the storm would eventually pass. The larger tempest of Philip's inevitable discovery and rage still loomed, but for tonight at least, they had found harbor. Spring came to Bodega Bay with gentle persistence, wildflowers pushing through rocky soil, fog retreating earlier. Each morning, sunlight lingering longer each evening. Hope, now 5 months old, blossomed with the season. She had learned to roll over, to grasp objects with determined concentration, to laugh with uninhibited joy when Zoe made faces at her. The cottage that had once been Elena's solitary hiding place had transformed into something unexpected, a home. Marcus had found work at the local marina, his expertise quickly earning him respect despite his deliberately vague backstory. Zoe attended the small community school, where her selective mutism was accepted without judgment, her artistic talents nurtured, and Elena, while still cautious in public, had gradually integrated into the town's quiet rhythms. To their neighbors, they appeared to be a blended family finding their footing. Rebecca Sullivan, her baby daughter, her brother-in-law Marcus, and his child, Zoe. An unconventional arrangement perhaps, but one that raised few eyebrows in a community accustomed to people seeking fresh starts along the rugged coastline. Behind closed doors, the reality was more complex. Catherine Zhang had been methodically building their case against Philip, gathering testimonies from former employees, documenting financial misconduct. creating a narrative that would withstand his inevitable counterattack. "We're ready," the lawyer announced during a secure video call one clear April morning. "The SEC is prepared to move forward with securities fraud charges based on the evidence you provided. I've coordinated with the Domestic Violence Coalition to ensure your safety protocols are in place. All we need now is your decision to proceed." Elena glanced toward the garden visible through the window, where Marcus was showing Hope a butterfly that had landed on a lavender bush. Zoe sat nearby, sketching the scene with her usual intense focus. "What happens when we file?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. "We submit everything simultaneously. Divorce petition citing abuse, evidence to the SEC, and your sworn statement about the attempted murder." Zhang's expression was grave. "Once that happens, you'll need to be prepared to testify. Your status as alive rather than deceased will become public knowledge almost immediately, and Philip will know exactly who to target," Elena concluded quietly. "We'll have protection in place," Zhang assured her. "The Domestic Violence Coalition has secure housing ready. Private security has been arranged through a donor whose daughter experienced similar circumstances." Elena nodded, still watching the scene in the garden. "And after? If we win, if Philip faces consequences, what? Then?" The lawyer's voice softened slightly. "That part is entirely up to you. The trust fund we've established using the assets you managed to secure before leaving would provide financial independence. Your testimony will help others who've experienced similar abuse. Beyond that," she shrugged, "you rebuild, however you choose." That evening, after Hope was asleep and Zoe had retreated to her room with her sketchbook, Eleanor and Marcus sat on the porch, watching stars emerge above the silhouettes of pine trees. The topic that had hovered between them all day remained unspoken until Elena finally broke the silence. "Zhang says we're ready to file," she said simply. Marcus nodded, unsurprised. "You've been expecting this." "Everything changes once we move forward," she continued. "No more hiding, no more pretending." She turned to face him directly. "No more safety, at least not here." He met her gaze steadily. "You're going to do it. File the case." It wasn't a question, but Elena answered anyway. "Yes, Hope deserves a future without shadows, and other women deserve to know the truth about Philip Westbrook, Humanitarian of the Year." Her voice carried a justified bitterness in the final words. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his focus seemingly on the distant horizon where the ocean met sky. "When?" he asked finally. 3 days from now. Zhang has arranged everything. Secure. Transportation to San Francisco, protected housing, the press strategy. She hesitated. "Marcus, I want to be clear about something. This is my battle, mine and Hope's. You and Zoe have already risked too much. No one would blame you for keeping your distance from what comes next." The offer hung between them, a release from obligation, a chance to protect Zoe from the media storm and potential danger that would follow Eleanor's resurrection from legal death. Marcus turned to her, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. "Is that what you want? For us to stay away?" "Of course not," Elena whispered, the truth escaping before she could filter it. "That's the last thing I want." "Then don't offer it," he said simply. "Because we're not going anywhere." "But Zoe..." "I asked Zoe this morning what she would think about moving to a new place," he interrupted gently. "Know what she wrote?" He pulled a folded note from his pocket and handed it to Elena, in Zoe's careful handwriting. "As long as we all stay together. Hope needs her family." Elena felt tears form, the simple wisdom of a child cutting through adult complications. "She considers us family." "We are family," Marcus said quietly. "Not by blood or law or any traditional definition, but by choice. by showing up when it matters, by being there for each other when the world turned its back. He reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his, a gesture both gentle and firm. Elena, I'm not good with fancy words or big declarations, but I know that what we've built here matters, and I won't let you face what's coming alone. The conviction in his voice, the steady pressure of his hand around hers, broke something open in Elena's heart. For months, she had been the strong one, the strategic one, the one carrying the weight of their precarious situation. Now, in the simple assertion of togetherness, she felt a burden lift. I'm scared, she admitted, the words barely audible. I know, he replied. Me too, but we've faced worse odds already. The next morning brought clarity and purpose. Elena called Zhang to confirm their decision to proceed and to adjust the logistics to include Marcus and Zoe. The lawyer sounded unsurprised by this development. I'll arrange appropriate security and accommodation for all four of you, she said efficiently. The statement, we've prepared positions, Mr. Calloway as a good Samaritan who rescued you from drowning after your husband's attempt on your life. We don't need to elaborate on your current relationship unless you choose to. Current relationship. The phrase lingered in Elena's mind after the call ended. What exactly was their relationship? More than friends, not quite romantic partners, bound by crisis and care and quiet loyalty. Labels seemed inadequate for the connection they'd forged. The days before their departure passed in careful preparation. They packed only essentials, knowing they wouldn't return to the cottage regardless of the outcome. Marcus handled practical logistics, securing the vehicle, mapping routes, establishing emergency protocols. Elena focused on preparing Hope for the journey and helping Zoe understand in age-appropriate terms what lay ahead. On their final evening in the cottage, Elena stood in the empty bedroom that had been Hope's nursery, running her hand along the windowsill where sea glass and shells collected by Zoe had formed a protective boundary. We'll be back someday, Marcus said from the doorway, watching her silent farewell. Not to live perhaps, but to visit, to show Hope where she spent her first months. Elena nodded, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. This place had been more than a hideout. It had been where she became a mother, where she had healed enough to fight back, where four broken people had begun to form something whole. As dawn broke on their departure day, they loaded the last bags into Marcus's SUV. Zoe placed her special stones in a circle around Hope's car seat, a ritual of protection in her silent language. Elena took one final walk through the empty cottage, committing details to memory. The way light filtered through pine branches onto the living room floor, the sound of the old refrigerator's gentle hum, the view of the bay from the kitchen window. Outside, Marcus waited beside the vehicle, his expression a mixture of determination and tenderness. "Ready?" he asked as she emerged. Elena looked back at the cottage one last time, then at the man who had risked everything to help her, the silent child who had offered friendship without words, and her daughter, peaceful in her car seat, the miracle who had given her the courage to survive. "Ready," she confirmed. As they drove away from Bodega Bay, following the coastal highway south toward San Francisco and the confrontation that awaited, Eleanor felt not just fear, but a profound sense of rightness. The journey ahead would be difficult, perhaps dangerous, but they faced it together, not as victims fleeing in terror, but as a family moving purposefully toward justice. The morning sun rose higher, illuminating the road before them. Whatever happened next, they had already won the most important battle. They had created something beautiful from the wreckage of their broken pasts, something worth fighting for, something that felt remarkably like home. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.